Hello, Professor.
Hi.
Hi, Professor. How are you?
Wait just a minute.
Okay, sounds good.
Have to get this set up. Okay.
Okay, take your time. Let me know when you're ready.
1 minute. Get some things organized here.
Kids are crying on the background, so apologies. I can hear you, doctor, if you have a problem with sound. Do you hear me?
You can hear me?
I can hear you quite well. Your voice is very lovely, by the way.
Good.
Thank you so much, Professor Chomsky, for this lovely opportunity. Please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Walid. I'm a PhD researcher in linguistics in Babylon University. So I would like to, first of all, thank you so much on behalf of Babylon University, my professors, Hussein and Professor Farid and all other professors. They're saying hi to you. We have a big community of readers of your publications. So it's a great opportunity to say thank you on behalf of all Iraqi students who are reading your great works. Today, I think the best opportunity that I have is with you to motivate this generation. I have one question with some peripheral digressing perspectives that I like to touch upon and focus with you. And I will be lightweight, so I'm not gonna take long of your time. Lovely morning where you enjoy your coffee during this time. First, why should this generation learn English? That is the first question that I sent to you through email so we can discuss and hear your lovely insights about it. The floor is yours, Professor.
Well, we live in a very tightly interconnected world that offers a great many benefits, but to open the door, you have to have the key.
Yeah.
The key is to be fairly fluent in what is at the moment the general international language of interchange, communication, publication, and so on. Now it happens to be English. 20 years from now, it may be Chinese. Time in the future, it may be Arabic, as it once was centuries ago. At one time, it was Latin. This is transitory. When I started teaching 70 years ago at MIT, the world's major scientific engineering university, I was teaching French and German to graduate students, because if they wanted to have access to the scientific culture of the day, they had to know French and German. Now you have to know English.
Yeah.
That I should say that one of the serious errors of my own life, just to add a personal comment, had to do with Arabic. 75 years ago, when I was a student, I did learn Arabic. I learned enough to be able to read newspapers, a book, to converse with people. Unfortunately, over these many years, I let it lapse, which is a great gap in my understanding of the world and my ability to comprehend critical elements of the world. Mistake I shouldn't have made, and I don't think that others should make.
Now, do you think now, I heard the last meeting that you had with Professor Stephen Krashen, you touched base about the influence of internet on this generation, particularly. You added a little comment there where you mentioned that the this generation particularly is distracted by internet. So, and then later on, you mentioned the importance of reading. Now, my question is, how do this generation approach reading? In what way that you recommend in order to enlighten their minds, be more cognizant of the importance of language, especially English nowadays in this generation?
Well, I don't know the situation where you are, but in the United States, it's been carefully studied. The decline in reading is very serious.
Yeah.
It precedes the internet, but it's been intensified by the internet. This is a remarkable irony. The internet gives you easy access to a vast range of materials.
Of course.
So for a researcher, it's a lot easier to be able to find archival material at your fingertip than to have to go to the research library at the university and read old microfilms. It's a big step forward. And to some extent, it's being used. You can read journals, commentary, discussion, meet people from many parts of the world. But unfortunately, that's not being used. What's happened extensively is the internet has narrowed people's understanding and perception of the world. People tend, pretty naturally, I understand it, to turn immediately to things that reinforce their own beliefs, that respond to their own particular interests and prejudices, gets into a narrow world. I know there have been studies which show that reading materials in schools are now being lowered. The kind of books that used to be assigned in middle school are now assigned in high schools. I can see it in my own teaching. I used to be able to use literary allusions freely, and people understand them. Now they don't know what I'm talking about because they're not reading widely. They're glued to the internet on their own small bubbles. That has to be overcome if we're to have a world in which there's mutual interchange, common understanding. I should add that the severe problems that humans now face have no borders. These are international problems. Obviously true of the pandemic, even more dramatically true of global warming, of the threat of international conflict. Just about every major issue we face is one that is borderless, international. And we must move towards a world of mutual interchange, communication, solidarity, and a world of genuine internationalism, or else we're literally going to face extinction.
Well, I can confirm that this situation, particularly here in Iraq, is pretty much not better than the situation in the United States in terms of reading. I heard from one of the studies that they conducted recently that the average reader in Iraq reads about half a page per month, which is like nothing compared to the amount of reading I used to read, because I graduated with an MA degree in TESOL from California. I was taught there by Kathleen Bailey and some of her fellow colleagues. I want to move to the next point in our discussion, Professor, which is something relevant to your comment from the last meeting that you had with Nabil and Stephen Krashen. In Iraq, we have a problem of lack of stimuli to learn the second language because the context here is not supportive of learning second language. You mentioned quite insightfully the comment of lack of stimuli in L2 or deficiency of stimuli in L2 context. So based on your treasure of experience, how do you recommend we approach language teaching in Iraq?
The only way I can think of is to stress, to give students the opportunity to appreciate and enjoy the richness and excitement of the international cultures. As soon as you put your foot in, you immediately want to go to swim. It's an exciting, enriching experience. Just taste it and you're trapped and caught. You want to understand more. It's an exciting experience. Speaking again of my own experiences, much younger when I was.
So on average, when you were young person, on average, how many books did you read per month? If you can give me a comment on that.
Well, I know from childhood, the most exciting experience was to be able to go to the library on Saturday, come home with a big stack of books, depending on age, started reading 19th century English and Russian novels, then on to other things, but to be able to just curl up in a corner and to start reading the mass of books I'd accumulated that week was an exciting experience, and it still is. Piles of books everywhere that I'm dying to find time to get to, because it's so exciting to discover the amazing content that they have, the insights you learn, the perspectives, the appreciation of what the world and human society has to offer.
It's quite amazing that you mentioned culture, because culture is really relevant to understanding language. And out of the 4 skills, the major skills in language learning, reading, writing, speaking, and listening, which one do you recommend we emphasize the most in teaching L2 context here, specifically in Middle East, Professor?
Well, right now, there's really no alternative to gaining substantial fluency in English. Now it happens to be the international language. As I mentioned, 70 years ago, I was teaching French and German to graduate students at MIT because that's what you had to know if you wanted to do serious work in science and mathematics. Now, English. 20 or 30 years from now, maybe it'll be Chinese. But whatever it is, you have to be immersed in it if you want to be able to gain the enormous advantages offered to us by the integration of societies.
That's awesome. Now, the last question, Professor, is out of all the collection of books that you have published, which one is the most endearing to your heart and you recommend us read and focus more on in terms of language here in Middle East, specifically in Iraq?
You know, I'm often asked questions like that. I can never answer. There's just too many dimensions, too many alternatives, too many options. Too much depends on a person's individual concerns, interests, and aspirations. So I think the right answer to that kind of question is search.
Okay.
Go to the library, go to the bookstores, search. The way I gained my own education, I should say, is by having a desk in the great library of Harvard University, and just the ability to walk around the stacks and to get a sense of the richness and complexity of the cultures of the world, and to be able to pick up a book on any topic you maybe never even thought about and become immersed in it is a tremendous way to gain a rich, exciting education.
Thank you so much, Professor. I will definitely send you another email in case you are available in California or Arizona, or I can come over and see, because I do some videos on famous professors of language like Dan Larson Freeman, Stephen Krashen, and others. So you are the Ivy League professors, you are the pioneers of this field, and we look up to see you, meet you, hear you, and see your comments here. Specifically during this lockdown of COVID-19, people have been struggling, especially this new generation that is focusing more on internet and less on reading. Do you have, Professor, any final comments on words for this generation specifically to focus on as final words that you say to them to focus on this year, next year in terms of language learning, research, focus on developing their skills?
The only words that I have are to recognize the excitement of being in a position where you can have the riches, not only of today's world, but of the enormous contributions of the past, plunge into it, find out what excites you and engages your interest, pursue it. You have a great world ahead of you. It's open, it's available, but you have to take advantage of it.
Professor, thank you so much for this lovely meeting. It's actually a great opportunity to hear your words, especially when it comes to language learning and language acquisition. I often recommend my students to follow you, hear your insightful comments on language philosophy, on politics, on all aspects that you talk about in your meetings. It's a great opportunity. I think I'm the first Iraqi person to interview via Zoom. Is that correct?
Could be.
Thank you so much, Professor. I wish you all the best in this lovely morning. I hope you enjoy your lovely coffee. I wish you are here where I can invite you to a Middle Eastern strong coffee that will keep you awake.
Very pleased to have a chance to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Professor. I wish you all the best and have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Fail to start select another. Okay, let's just use the built-in camera because for some reason this isn't working.
The built-in camera looks awesome on you, especially your t-shirt.
Okay. Let's try it again.
Okay, awesome.
Built-in camera.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Professor, for your acceptance of this invitation. I had a lovely meeting with Noam Chomsky yesterday. Please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Walid Khalid. I completed my MA in TESOL in Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey. I returned back to Iraq, so I'm from Baghdad. Now I'm working as a PhD researcher in applied linguistics in Babylon University. You have a big community, unimaginable big community of readers for your publications, especially the Stuff of Thought. It's a great book. And you're really an inspiration to big community of readers of your work in psychology and cognitive linguistics. I don't know how much time you have, but I'll take advantage of every second of your lovely time. I have a few questions here, but to admit, it's really challenging to talk to you.
Okay. Hope it's not too challenging.
I'll be biased to writing, and I'll start with this lovely comment that you left in one of your conferences. You said this, quote, you mentioned that bad writing is a deliberate choice.
I tend to think it's not a deliberate choice. That although that is a common accusation, the question is, why is academic writing so bad? And a common answer is it's academics deliberately try to write in obscure language, so to show off how erudite, how learned, how wise they are, how sophisticated their subject is. So they're trying to fool their audiences into thinking that there's a lot more complexity and abstractness than there really is. They're hiding the fact they have nothing to say. I actually don't believe that theory because I just know too many scientists and scholars and linguists who definitely have something to say. They don't want to, they're not trying to impress the audience, but just writing is difficult. It's a skill. And unless you think when you're writing, both what are the ideas that I want to get down and how good is the prose, how good are the sentences, how good is the composition. Unless you make that effort, it's going to be terrible because you're going to be assuming that your audience knows what you know, the problem of egocentrism or failure to mind read, or the curse of knowledge, namely when you know something, it's hard to imagine what it's like for someone else who doesn't know it. And if you don't take that effort into making your language clear, it won't be clear. So there has to be a choice to write well. I don't think people make the choice to write badly, at least most people.
Okay, well, I'm going through the list of questions that I prepared here for you, and I would love if you elaborate more on how. I'm not going to go over the questions in order, so there's no chronological order for the questions, and I'm very interested to hear your detailed insights on this question particularly. How is cognitive linguistics contributing to modern language learning, especially in L2 context? We have in Iraq big community of L2 learners who lack stimuli to learn language. English is not the second spoken language in this community. In the Iraqi society particularly, we have so many ethnicities here, and they speak derivations of Arabic and Assyrian and Kurdish. But English has become part of the new generation trend to either show off or boast that you know a little bit of English, that you can communicate with other cultures. And this trend is being escalating recently. So I would love to hear your insights on how cognitive linguistics is contributing to expediting the process of language learning in modern life.
Well, indeed, English is becoming a de facto world language. No one decided that it would. No one thought this was a good idea. It's just happening largely because of the influence of the United States in technology and in entertainment. There was a dream that we would have Esperanto as the universal second language. There are enthusiasts for Esperanto, but since it isn't tied to a community, it's not a language that children learn as their first language. It is not as expressive and as embedded in a global culture as it turned out English ended up being. But in terms of cognitive linguistics, there are a number of contributors. One of them is that language is used in a social context. It's used to communicate. It's also used to project our sense of self, who we are, how we relate to the person we're dealing with. And I have found that unless you are called on to use a language in conversation, then it's very difficult the first time you have to do it. If you learn from textbooks, if you learn from online courses, because when you're speaking to someone else, you don't just so much care about English syntax, English vocabulary, you also care about what relationship you have with that person. You don't want to seem like an idiot. You don't want to be arrogant and force them to speak in your language. You don't want to be rude. And so a lot of language competence consists in the reflexes of politeness, of what linguists call pragmatics, namely the use of language in a conversational context. Without that, then you might be able to write papers in English or some other foreign language, but you will have a lot of difficulty carrying on a conversation.
To what extent do you think that L2 learners and teachers of English, especially like me, which I find really challenging actually to teach writing, since I'm not a native speaker of English. I pursued my MA in language teaching. However, I still have this obstacle of teaching writing specifically in L2 context? Because some people say, and I'll quote for Fox News style, some people say that
people are saying, a lot of people are saying, yeah.
Yeah, some people say that non-native speakers cannot teach writing. Do you agree or disagree on that? And what are your recommendations to L2 teachers of English in terms of writing?
Yeah, I don't agree. And in fact, sometimes L2, I have found in my correspondence, including people from the Middle East, that often the questions that they ask me about English vocabulary, English grammar are very subtle. They're sometimes hard to answer, precisely because they have to think about them. It isn't completely natural, it isn't unconscious. And as I mentioned in our first exchange, often good writing comes only from consciously thinking about how to be clear. If it's too easy, and if you just dump what's on your mind, then other people aren't going to be able to figure out what was on your mind. But if you think, okay, I have to get my ideas across, I want my readers to understand them, I'm going to use the medium of English sentences to do it, what should go into those sentences, that kind of self-consciousness can sometimes lead to clearer writing.
Now, well, I'm a non-native speaker of English, and I keep saying and reiterating that, particularly because I want to emphasize that identity. I'm proud of being a non-native speaker who speaks English. I can write essays, but they are not 100% perfect. But do you think when we become cognizant or conscious about what we are writing, we are going to complicate the lexical level of writing or simplify it? I remember the quote that you made about the cutaneous rabbit tapping here.
Yes. Yes, it was an article in a scientific journal in my field, and I didn't know what they were talking about because they use shorthand, and that is a sin of academics, not just academics. That's why legalese is so hard to read, the writing of lawyers, bureaucratese, corporatese, any specialty. The people inside the specialty forget that new babies are being born every day. They aren't born knowing the jargon of your specialty. You have to explain things with examples, with concrete images. Ironically, for someone who studies language, I sometimes think that language is overrated as a way of understanding the world. Ultimately, we have to be able to see in our mind's eye what the writer is seeing. And a good mental model of writing is the writer should think, I've seen something, I want my reader to see it. How do I allow my reader to see what I'm seeing? And unless the reader can form an image in their minds, and you talked about the cutaneous rabbit illusion, which is, it means nothing unless you know what it is. What it really consists of is if you close your eyes and someone has a few taps on the wrist, few taps on the elbow, few taps on the shoulder, it feels like a set of taps running up your arm. Now, why don't you just say that? If you just explain what it is, taps on the arm, not cutaneous illusion, then people can visualize what it refers to, and that's what comprehension consists of. It isn't just the writer uses a bunch of words, blah, 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 and the reader hears a bunch of words, blah, 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 blah. The point of the words is so that the reader can see something in the world that the writer has seen.
Well, we've been dictated since I was a child that the more you use formal expressions, the higher perception of you as an English writer will be. I remember this quote from Steve Jobs when he said that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. I don't know if it is associated to Steve Jobs or somebody else, but sometimes people interpret the simplicity of lexical items that we choose as weakness of our writing. What is your comment on this, Professor?
I think that the overuse of jargon and unnecessary technical terms is a sign of weakness, is a sign of laziness. Often, I agree with Steve Jobs, it's requires a lot of thought, of intelligence, of planning, of sophistication to write clear, simple prose. That is very much true. It's very easy to just cough up all of the jargon terms that you've been using with your colleagues and you just read in a book, but to mentally translate from all of those jargon terms to what they actually refer to, what's actually going on. Are you tapping someone on the arm? Instead of talking about stimuli, if you talk about, you know, the Muppet dolls, if instead of talking about a program or an intervention, you say, we put up a sign with a frowning face, so that people know what you do. That often takes work because it's easy to forget what your own professional jargon is referring to. It's hard work to think, oh, wait, I know this, but do my readers know this? Putting yourself in the mind of the readers is what leads to clear prose.
Some people draw a dichotomy between reading and writing, and they teach them separately. To what extent do you think that these two skills are complementing to each other or independent of each other when it comes to mastering and improving the writing style or prose that you have in this perspective particularly?
I think they're very much connected. And when I wrote my own writing manual, I had to confess on the first page that even though I wrote the manual because I hoped it would help people become better writers, when I asked people who I know are good writers, what manuals did you read? What's the competition? They said, oh, I didn't read any style manuals. I thought, so you really don't need what I am now writing to become a good writer. How did they become a good writer? The answer is the same in every case. They did a lot of reading.
Okay, so it's not. Is it coming from experiential learning and walking in the field and getting in touch with people and culture, or is it more of reading particular books and manuals?
So since I've written a manual, I like to think it's reading a manual, but and I hope it helps. But
I'll take everything you say for granted.
Yes, but it can't be the only thing, because even when I was writing my manual, you know, I didn't want it to make it 1,000 pages. So I chose what I wanted to emphasize. And as I was writing, I thought, gee, I really should also talk about this. I should talk about that. I should give this advice. I should give that advice. There's just so much to mastering writing that you can't lay it all down in a set of steps. But when you are a reader, when you consume a lot of good writing, then those millions and millions of words leave an impression in the brain, and you get a feel for what's natural in English, what's unnatural, what are the little idioms and figures of speech and jokes that English speakers use to kind of liven up their prose. But it isn't just experiential, because you also have to apply some thought to it, especially if you're learning a foreign language as an adult. Unlike children who really do have an advantage in picking up a language, with an adult, especially if you want to become not just a competent writer, but a good writer, you have to think, oh, I really like that paragraph. This is a really good writer that I'm reading. But what did they do right? Why am I enjoying this sentence so much? And you have to reverse engineer or diagnose what goes into good writing, so that when it's your turn to write, you know what those tricks are.
Okay. Well, on the same train of thought, since we are talking about the manuals of writing, I have a cheat sheet of one of the questions here. And which one is the most endearing book out of the collection of books that you have that is really endearing to you and you recommend readers? And I'll take it for granted from you that this is the book that I will read and recommend my fellow students and friends to read.
Are you talking now about particularly writing manuals?
Yes.
Well, the classic writing manual, the one that everyone begins with, is The Elements of Style by E.B. White and William Strunk. Strunk and White. Yeah. It's been around for 80 years. It was written, the first draft was written more than 100 years ago. Yeah. It's got a lot of problems. There's a lot of, there's There's a few bits of bad advice in it, but on the whole, it's a very good place to start.
Okay.
So if you're talking about writing manuals, you have to start with Strunk and White. Some linguists have criticized it. My friend Geoffrey Pullum, the famous linguist at Edinburgh, thinks it's toxic, it's terrible. I disagree with Jeff. I agree with him, it has problems, but it's a very good place to start.
That's exactly what Professor Noam Chomsky said yesterday in the interview. I'll link the interview in the next email that I'll send to you. He talks about how you can immerse yourself in reading in order to improve your writing and improve understanding, your understanding of cultures. So
can I actually add one more bit of advice there?
Yes.
This is another classic. This isn't a book, it's an essay, it's a famous essay. George Orwell's Politics and the English Language.
Oh my God, that's
everyone has to read that. That's got problems too. A lot of the things that it says are wrong, but still you have to read it if you want to become
it's still valid here.
Yes.
So you think that non-native speakers of English can excel in writing? If yes, why?
Yeah. And there are famous examples. Two of the best writers of the English language did not speak it as a native language: Vladimir Nabokov and Joseph Conrad.
Conrad, yeah.
Yes.
Conrad.
And Nabokov.
So you think that, Professor, you think that non-native speakers can excel in writing and they can publish and they can improve their writing to an extent or equivalent level to native speakers?
I think it requires more effort. It requires more work. And my own study with Joshua Hartshorn and Joshua Tenenbaum, which we published about 4 years ago in the journal Cognition, shows that there really is an advantage if you begin learning a language before the age of about 17. After 17, there starts to be a decline. But still, the fact that you can't reach 100% of the proficiency of a child doesn't mean that you can't be very, very high, especially with lots of reading experience.
Great. So, Professor, I don't want to take much of your time. I know that you have this precious time for you to relax and have coffee probably in the afternoon and in the lovely, are you in California right now, right?
Right now I'm in Berkeley, California. That's right.
Okay, I love it. I miss it so much. I stayed there for 3 years during my MA degree studies. I was in Monterey, south of San Francisco, south of San Jose. Based on your extensive research in psychology, and I promise this is my last question. Based on your extensive study in psychology and research in psychology and cognitive linguistics, what are the ultimate kind of advice that you give to L2 learners of English in order to speed up their learning process of English, specifically tapping on the findings in cognitive linguistics?
I would give two pieces of advice, and they connect to our conversation. One of them is be sure that you actually use it in conversation, that you have other speakers that you develop your skills with. It can't just be from books. The second is to find examples of English or whatever language you're learning you really enjoy, that are funny, that are clear, that are interesting, so that the content will keep you going. So it's not just an exercise, but you want to understand it in order to understand the content.
Professor, thank you so much for this lovely meeting. Thank you so much
pleasure,
for
Waleed.
accepting this invitation. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for this precious time that you've given us with this insightful list of comments and recommendations. We really appreciate your efforts. You're such a hero. You are one of the biggest, actually, professors that we look up to when it comes to cognitive linguistics, especially in our studies. University of Babylon, University of Baghdad. We thank you on behalf of our universities here, and we really appreciate you for the amount of great work that you're doing.
That's very kind of you, Waleed. Thank you very much for having me on. I wish you great success in your studies in this series, and I wish success and satisfaction to all the people who are watching this interview.
I really appreciate it, Professor. Thank you so much, and have a lovely day.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Good evening.
Good evening. Good morning.
Good morning, Professor. Good evening in my time. Professor Stephen, thank you so much for joining me in this meeting. It's such a lovely and beautiful chance and opportunity to get to talk to you. Please allow me to introduce myself, and I hope that you had a very delicious coffee because I already made mine.
I'm going to have another one. I'll finish this and then go get more.
Sure. My name is Waleed. I'm a PhD student at Babylon University, and we are so obsessed with your theories, especially when it comes to acquisition theories and your opinion in language acquisition and language learning. So it's a golden opportunity for me, as we say in Arabic, that we get to talk to you and hear your insightful comments about language acquisition and language learning, since we are in EFL challenging context with lack of stimuli of language learning and language acquisition, of course, and language input specifically. So I would be more than happy actually to hear your comments, and my professors say hi to you on, so I'm saying that to you on behalf of them. And the floor is yours, Professor. If you want to grab more coffee.
Questions for you before I leave.
Yes.
When people ask you, why is your English so good? What do you tell them?
I studied in California.
Where in California?
Monterey. I was taught by Kathleen Bailey and Peter Shaw and John Hedgecock. I graduated in 2013 with an MA in TESOL, and I came back to work and serve in Iraq.
Let me tell you something interesting.
Yes.
My grandson has just begun university at Monterey.
Middlebury now.
Yeah, he's there right now in his dorm room in Monterey at Cal State Monterey. Isn't that wonderful?
Oh my God, that's such a beautiful coincidence. Well, yes. I was taught and instructed by a dictator type of Professor Kathleen Bailey, who I adore, and she's my model of language teaching. She's a great professor.
Let me tell you about the truth about Kathleen Bailey.
Yes.
She's a wonderful singer and musician. Did you know that?
No, seriously?
Absolutely, absolutely. First class.
Oh my God. I never knew that, to be honest.
I know lots of gossip that you don't know. Peter Shaw.
Yeah.
A brilliant artist. Did you know that? Drawing. Okay, so you know about him. Very nice fellow. Who else can I tell you about? Who else did you study with?
John Hedgecock, Gene Turner.
Hedgecock I knew quite well. Yeah, a long time ago. So when we were all young. Yeah, when I came to California from New York, long time ago in the early 80s, I was at USC, and these people were graduate students at UCLA. We all got together for seminars and workshops. So I got to know them pretty well. Kathleen Bailey was really good member of the group, et cetera. So you did very well. That's a good group.
Yeah, there's such a great elite, actually, of professors, especially Professor Professor Peter Shaw. He always talked nicely about you, and he always recommended us to read your work. We were planning actually to pay you a visit in San Jose, but it was really hard because of the pre-departure preparation back in 2013, and there was some chaos going on in Iraq. So we had to book our tickets and return back as soon as we graduated in August 2013. But it's a great opportunity actually to bring these memories back and always talk about the kind of work that we did with them. And I'm always in touch with them.
Any other languages? If I can interrupt you, do you speak any other languages?
I speak Arabic and I speak English. I've learned basic Spanish when I was teaching Hispanic community in Pacific Grove in California back in 2012 and 2013. And then it just became rusty over the time, lack of stimuli here in Iraq. And with my engagement with PhD in linguistics, I've been offshore of actually Spanish. I'm planning to bring it back soon, hopefully, fingers crossed.
I'm always working with languages. It's part of the work. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Spanish is especially interesting. There are a lot of Spanish speakers here, and they're all so nice. They're all so generous. It's easy to talk to them. Hardworking people, really wonderful. So Spanish has been a lot of fun. I'll talk about that. Talk a little bit.
I'll tell you a story. Part of our practicum part in Monterey Institute of International Studies, now Middlebury Institute, we were told by Professor Peter Shaw to go to Carmel and to go to other small communities where Hispanic population are present. But part of this Hispanic community were illegal immigrants. And there was a center in Pacific Grove called Peace Resource Center. They used to come there when the sun sets because the presence of police is going to be minimal. So we hide them, we close the curtains and start teaching them English. They wanted to work in McDonald's and other big franchise restaurants, but their lack of communicative skills in English just made it possible for them to access the owners and tell them, well, we just need to work there. They're really hardworking and dedicated people.
Absolutely, yeah. Well,
I have documented a few videos of me teaching there. If you like, I can share some when the meeting is over.
Okay, I'm going to go get some more coffee.
Sure.
And just to answer your question, yes, you may interrupt me with friendly questions.
Say it again.
You may interrupt me with friendly questions.
Sure, definitely. Okay. Sure. Okay. Enjoy your coffee. I can wait.
Oh, I'll tell you the coffee story when I get back.
Lovely. Okay, great.
Okay, here's the story.
Yes.
I grew up in the 1940s. Coffee was considered evil. Everybody thought it was bad for you. We didn't know. My mother was addicted to coffee. Every morning, my father would bring her a cup of instant coffee. Oh, gosh. And we all felt, Mom, you can't do that. It's not good for you. And I never had any coffee at all until I was 24 years old.
Oh, my God.
Yes. I was teaching in Ethiopia. Okay. And my life was not successful. I had been in college, out of college, dropped out, flunked out, wasn't a good student. I had no direction. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I came to school one day to teach in Addis Ababa, and I had 3 hours sleep. And I was really tired. One of the teachers, the Egyptian lady, Mrs. Saeed, I will never forget Mrs. Saeed. She changed my life that day. She invited us for coffee during coffee break. My first coffee was a double espresso.
Wow, such a shift.
I woke up. Coffee does not make me nervous. It makes me normal. That was the beginning of my life.
Okay.
After that, everything was easy. I've been drinking coffee since then. I finished teaching in Ethiopia. Thanks to my mother's help, I was admitted to graduate school at UCLA. The rest is history. All because, and when I got back to Ethiopia, my mother and I went to Starbucks, and I got her all the new coffees, and she loved it. She drank coffee after that for another couple of years while she was still with us. And every cup of coffee I have now, I think of Mom, and I am drinking all the coffee that she did not drink, that she denied herself.
Oh my God, such an adorable deed.
It's one of the reasons for my success. So
it gives you a jitter.
Never. You say in Hebrew, l'chaim.
Okay, great.
Life. Yes.
I
speak a little Hebrew. I speak a little Amharic, but not. What can you do?
So to count the number of languages that you speak now.
Yeah, I'm always on languages. That's the secret. That's how you know. My best one is German. I'll give a little demo in German.
Okay.
After that, French. I'm pretty good in French. After that, Spanish, number 4. And I'm okay. I'll tell the story to the group about Spanish. I've learned a lot doing it. Hebrew, Amharic. I've been doing some Mandarin, some Chinese. Okay. So all the time, getting my hands dirty with languages. Every day I read something in other languages all the time. Depends on the book. So get something to read in Spanish, something really easy. Don't look up any words, just have a good time.
Oh, there is a lovely question that I want to ask you here. What drives such great and nuclear motivation inside you to learn and be fascinated about languages?
Okay, I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Here's my hypothesis, which does not come from me. We are all different. You've noticed that.
Yes.
We have different interests, different talents. And what's easy and wonderful for me is not for you. We're all slightly different. Happiness is finding your path, finding what you are good at and what you want to do and what's fun. Someone once said, when I'm writing, I don't feel I should be doing something else. That's me, languages and doing this work. Other stuff, I'm just as incompetent and boring as anybody else. So Ethiopia was very good. 3 things happened. I discovered coffee. I met my wife. She was teaching at the same school. We're still married 55 years later. Okay. And I found my path.
Great.
Eric, I found what I was supposed to do. And we're all different. School thinks we should all be the same. That's nonsense. School should help you find your interest.
Okay. Well, that comes to the next debate, actually, whether schooling is sufficient to learn languages or not.
Yeah.
What's your comment or what's your take on that?
I'll give you a clear answer. Yes and no. Let's talk about it during the talk. That's a good one.
Okay. It's such a great and lovely discussion that we can flexibly move around in the discussion, and to be very clear that the idea of talking to you and sharing your thoughts without restrictions on any path is going to be the beauty of this conversation and this interview. Just one comment, that when I'm not looking directly at the lens, I'm looking at you on my screen because I'm recording the meeting on a separate camera on different corner. So when I'm not looking at the camera, that does not mean I'm not paying attention to you here.
Okay, I got it. Okay, about the talk, I do have a prepared talk.
Yes.
That's fine. Okay, I can do that. But I don't want being interrupted, etc. I will cover everything.
Perfect.
I won't, and I'm going to assume that people have a little bit of background knowledge. Okay.
Sure. And just to give you one more comment here, that this conversation, this interview is going to be translated into Arabic later on. So I'll add the subtitle down in the comment section and also in the video. And I will add part of the slides that you're talking about on the screen later in the post-production process. So this meeting is just the raw interview where you are going to be given the floor to present anything that you want without any interruptions. And I'll be taking a few notes. And once you're ready to start the conversation, I'm going to stop talking. I remember one book that Peter Shaw recommended is How to Teach While Your Mouth is Shut. I still remember that point. So I'll just keep it here. I'm going to keep my mouth shut, even though there's some inner urge to ask you questions about that. So please, Professor, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Steve Krashen. Very happy to be with you. I have coffee. I'm ready for anything. I'm going to talk today about fiction, otherwise known as stories, otherwise known as literature. I think this is a powerful way of acquiring language, focusing on fiction. I want to tell you how I got interested in using fiction. A couple of things. It started all about, 25 years ago. I live about 40 kilometers really from the Los Angeles area, from Santa Monica. And if I want to go to Santa Monica, the only way to get there is by car. There's a bus, but it's not very frequent. And it takes about 40 minutes. So I have to drive. And I used to go to Santa Monica at least twice a week. Very important. One, of course, was to go to Gold's Gym and say hello to Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yes.
Yes, that's very important. But more important, I am addicted, and I'm still addicted to my grandchildren, and they live in Santa Monica. So I would go there, and my daughter and son-in-law, of course, but I would go there at least twice a week just to have fun with my granddaughter and my grandson, and et cetera. And that kept up for many, many years. The problem with all this is that the ride is really boring. What are you going to do in the car for 40 minutes up and 40 minutes back?
Down.
Well, I don't want to listen to the radio, because what's on the radio? News. The news is all, in those days, it was all Donald Trump. That's it, day and night. And that was enough. All the news programs were the same. Same with the interview program. So I stopped doing that. Then there's music. And you know what they did? They're so eager to get every bit of money they can get. All the good music is on separate programs, and you have to subscribe. You have to pay. Otherwise, the music is horrible. So I didn't do that. I went to the local libraries. There are 2 libraries close to me. I love going to one of them, especially because my daughter was working there and I could stop in and say hi to her. And I rented audiobooks, books on tape, books on CD, not rented. I took them out. They're free. Okay. Now the audiobooks, it was a limited selection, but good enough. Everything was in English. It would have been nice to listen to stories in other languages, but they didn't have them. Okay. And the rest was fiction. And the fiction they had was not the classics. You know, look, I'm a college professor. I am a famous person. I shouldn't be reading bestsellers. I should be reading sophisticated nonfiction. No, I listen to bestsellers. That's what they had. And here's what I discovered. The bestsellers were good. Not every one of them, but most of them were pretty good. I listened to mystery stories. I listened to crime novels. I listened to romances. I listened to medical novels. I listened to law novels. That was I don't care about the law. I never wanted to go to law school. The whole thing is boring. John Grisham wrote these brilliant law novels. I listened to them one after the other. Wonderful. My first book that I listened to, of course, Harry Potter. Magnificent. I listened to all the Harry Potters I could find at the library. Harry Potter is amazing. I'll tell you what happened to me, the same thing that happens to you. Many of you, when you drive, listen to stories in the car. Good idea. I found when I got home, I would pull the car into the driveway and stay in the car to hear the end of the chapter. The books were so good. I used to do that all the time, just 2-3 minutes just to hear the next scene, etc. That's how good they are. Little word about Harry Potter. Magnificent. J.K. Rowling understood education. Hogwarts, the school, the kids, the 3 kids who had this very interesting friendship, Harry, Hermione, all that, marvelous. There was good teaching, there was bad teaching.
Of course.
The history of magic class was taught by a ghost who was boring and just droned on and put everybody to sleep, etc. And then other classes like potions, that was brilliant. You went into class and you made a potion. And defense against the dark arts, you tried it out. There was this great conversation between Harry Potter and the temporary head of Hogwarts. who is not a good person. And she decided to have more tests. The kids shouldn't have a good time in class. They should study hard and have test after test. And Harry was like us. He says, we can't just have tests. We have to have interesting things. She said, no, Harry, tests is all there is. That's life. There's nothing except tests for school. And this is the kind of debate they had. It was right there in the novel. And the children themselves, Hermione was so interesting. She was the super student. One of my students in a class I taught wrote a paper, is Hermione smart? Because she knew all the answers and studied hard. Great question. So I got very interested in these books. I one after the other. The books taught you things, you learned things. I'll come back to this topic, but I'll mention one thing. I finally listened to a book by John Grisham called The Runaway Jury. It's about serving on a jury. Before that, about a year before that, I was on a jury. I was, forced to do jury duty. And because I was an educated person, they made me the foreman. They made me the chair of the jury. I wasn't very good. If I had read The Runaway Jury before that, justice would have been served. I did not do a good job because I didn't understand juries or how to be a foreman. That book would have taught me what I needed to know. That's what you learn from fiction. So the basis of everything that I think should happen is fiction. It also gives me the answer to my social life and the problems I have in parties. I have a hard time at parties. Well, I used to, because I didn't know what to talk about with strangers. I figured it out. If you're going to a party and you know you're not going to know anybody, go see the last 3 movies, which are fiction. They're usually very good, the current movies, or read the last 3 fiction books. You can go up to anybody and say, oh, I just saw Terminator 41. And you will have a discussion. You will have a discussion. And the discussion you have with ordinary people is usually worthy of any literature class. They'll discuss the quality, the characters, the casting, was this a good decision, etc. Fiction is crucially important. So that's my warm-up. I want to spend about 7 or 8 minutes reviewing the theory first, just to make sure we're all on the same page, as they say.
Perfect.
I want to go through the hypotheses very, very quickly, and I'll be going back over them. It all begins with a fundamental idea. There's 2 ways of getting better in a language. You can acquire language, you can learn language, and they're different. Acquisition, we sometimes call the natural way, and we sometimes call it picking up a language. It's subconscious. While it's happening, you don't know it's happening. After you have finished acquiring, you don't know the knowledge is in your mind. It's there. Acquisition is very powerful. We are very good at acquisition. We are just discovering that. It's the way we get better in languages. And that's been our big mistake in teaching. And I was guilty of the same thing in the beginning. The second process is conscious language learning. That's knowing about language. The subject and the verb are supposed to agree. This is the sound this letter makes, etc. This is conscious learning. We are not very good at this, and I'll talk a lot more about this. The second hypothesis kept us very busy in the 1980s. Very exciting time. Not as exciting as now, but pretty good. We acquire language, the rules of language, in a predictable order. Some things come in the beginning, some things in the middle, some things late. Let me use English as an example. For English as a first language and second language, sometimes they're the same order. The progressive tense, John is playing the violin, that comes early. The third person singular, if you've taught English, you know this, very late acquired. It seems very simple. I go, you go, he goes. In first language, there's 6 months to a year between the 2. In second language, sometimes it never comes. It's not in all the dialects, too. We know people who write English perfectly, but when they speak, sometimes they drop the third person singular. I want to talk to you about my friend Masayoshi Shibatani. He was a colleague of mine at USC when I was in linguistics. His specialty was Japanese syntax. His office was across from me. He did his dissertation on Japanese syntax, but he knew everything about English syntax. And I always asked him questions about English grammar. He always knew. Dr. Shibatani knew the rule for the third person singular. He had known it since he was 10 years old. Okay. He knew more about English grammar than anybody in California. He made mistakes when he spoke. He would occasionally drop the third person singular. That's fascinating. And he was really good. His English was excellent. So that's the natural order. Some amazing facts, important facts. Number one, you can't change it. Sorry. You can drill third person singular all day long, but you can't change the order. It's not from simple to complicated. Some things seem very simple, third person singular, but they're acquired late. Some things are very complicated, like the progressive. It's early acquired, okay? And it's not the syllabus. 1981, I gave a talk at the TESOL meeting in Los Angeles. I was already very famous, so lots of people came. There was standing room only. Actually, there were only 10 chairs in the room, and 12 people came. So it was standing room, okay? And I made this announcement. We have the natural order. Let's teach along the natural order. Wrong. The natural order is the result of acquisition, not the cause. We'll see more about that later. I don't think we should have any teaching order. Okay, what about grammar? The big question. People have been saying these horrible things about me. Okay, and here's one of them. Right? It says, never teach grammar. Teaching grammar is evil. Teach grammar, go to jail. No, that's not my position. My position is it's very hard to teach grammar and get results. Sometimes it's okay here and there. People are curious, etc., but it's really a tough road. We have hypothesized that there are 3 conditions that have to be met if you want to be able to use grammar. And you use it, we think, as an editor, as a monitor. While you're talking or you're writing, you're about to make a mistake, you correct yourself. You correct yourself. Very hard to do. 3 conditions have to be met. Number 1, you have to know the rule. We don't know the rules. Let's say we visit the world's greatest syntactician, and that is still Noam Chomsky, my hero, of course, okay? Noam Chomsky knows more about English grammar than anybody in the world, okay? He has been looking for universals by doing deep analyses of English grammar. So the correct analysis will lead us to universals. That's good strategy. He doesn't know all the rules. He says, we have only described fragments. That's true. So the best grammarians don't know all the rules. The best grammar books don't have all the rules, okay? The best teachers can't teach all the rules. We don't know them. The best students don't understand all the rules we teach and don't remember them. So this is hopeless right away. Know the rule is a very severe constraint. Number 2, if you want to think about rules while you're talking, you can't pay attention to what the other person is saying.
That's
your
true.
attention away. You wind up planning your sentence while the other person's talking. Terrible. I used to do that. Then you come off with a perfect sentence and it's not relevant anymore because you weren't listening. Number 3, it takes time. We don't have time during normal conversation to find all the rules, bring them up, apply them. So 3 conditions: know the rule, think about correctness, have enough time. They are satisfied in only one time in our life: when we take a grammar test. When you take a grammar test, you study the rules, so you know the rules, or maybe you should, maybe you've forgotten them. You're thinking about correctness, it's a test, and you have time. It's usually a written test. Just a moment. Okay.
Gesundheit. Is this how it is said in German?
Yeah, Gesundheit. It's also Yiddish, so it's okay. That's one of my other languages. Yeah. I speak Yiddish once a year on the telephone with my cousins in Israel. Isn't that wonderful?
It's really wonderful.
Yiddish, the language of our parents and grandparents. It's great. It's so much fun. Anyway, so we have found that even when you give people a grammar test, they don't think much about grammar. It's not there very much, even when the conditions are met. So this is hopeless. Okay, that's grammar. Now we have to talk about how we acquire language. Here's the big moment. We acquire language in one way. Well, let me stop here and give you a quick language lesson, then I'll tell you. I'm going to give you 2 lessons in a language you have heard before. Maybe some of you can speak, took a class. I'll give you 2 quick lessons. You can tell me which lesson is better. Lesson number 1. Wir werden jetzt anfangen, Deutsch zu lernen. Und ich möchte im Voraus sagen, dass nach meiner Meinung Deutsch ist eine sehr schöne Sprache. Und ich hoffe, dass Sie alle sehr viel Erfolg mit Deutsch haben werden. What do you think? Good lesson so far? If I kept talking to you like that, would you pick up German?
No.
No. How about if I slowed down? That wouldn't help. How about if I repeated it? How about if I wrote it out and you could see it and all, and you copied it? None of those things matter. Here's lesson number 2. Das ist mein Kopf. Kopf. Verstehen Sie Kopf? Ja. Hier sind meine Ohren. Ohren. Ich habe 2 Ohren. 1, 2. 2 Ohren. Und hier sind meine Augen. Augen. Ich habe 2 Augen. 1, 2. Hier sind meine Brillen. Ja, meine Brillen. Und sind meine Zigaretten. Ich habe keine Zigaretten. Zigaretten sind nicht gut. If you understood lesson number 2, not every word, but just a little, you acquired some German. Now the big secret. We acquire language when we understand it. That's it. The best kept secret in our field. We acquire language not when we understand every word, but when we understand really anything, we acquire it. Now, the conditions for acquisition to happen are amazing. Number 1, acquisition is effortless, no work. If you understood a little of the German lesson, you acquired German without any effort. Language acquisition is easy. Isn't that wonderful?
Yes.
It's not diligent hard work. Number 2, I love this one. It's involuntary. Whether you like it or not, you all just acquired some German. The language acquisition device, I think, never shuts off. It's there our entire lives. Now, if we want acquisition to happen, some conditions have to be in it. The input has to be comprehensible, has to be interesting. I like the word compelling. So interesting, you forget that it's in another language. That's the way it works. You need a lot of it, and it's got to have a lot of context, rich input. Then it happens, okay? Another fact about acquisition, I think it's a fact. It happens a little bit at a time, not all at once. Researchers, brilliant researchers at the University of Illinois, I'm very dependent on their work. They have found when you see a word in context and you understand it, not all the meaning, but a little, you get a little piece, not all of it, maybe 5, 10% of the meaning and form. You keep hearing it, you keep reading it, gradually you get the whole thing. It takes a lot of input over time, and that's the only way it can possibly happen. Most contexts help. That's, people say, oh, you get deceptive contexts. Favorite example, you're watching something and there's English going on, and there's this picture of a man with a finger. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean finger? Does it mean hand? Does it mean point? Don't worry. It gives you a little hint. As you get more context, it gradually fills in. Very few contexts push you in the completely wrong direction. Okay. Corollary. Talking is not practicing. You don't get better by speaking. You don't get better by writing. Those things are the result of language acquisition. Isn't that wonderful? Now, my focus today, to get to business, is on one particular sub-hypothesis of comprehensible input. The kind of comprehensible input I think really works is stories, fiction. Our beginning methods today, a lot of them are based on fiction. Our intermediate methods are based on fiction. If you want to make sure the reading you are doing is interesting, there is a magic way of doing it. Select it yourself. You decide what you want to read. Wow. We have a couple of studies showing this. I like advertising this one because it's my former student, C.N. Lee, who's now just stepping down as dean in her college in the university in Taiwan. Wonderful student. I'm good friends with her husband, her children. It's wonderful. Anyways, I like advertising her work. One of her many papers. She compared self-selected reading and assigned reading, where the assigned reading was supposed to be just right. Novels is for intermediate advanced English students in Taiwan. Novels based on movies that the teacher knew were popular versus self-selected. Choose it yourself. Self-selected won. But the best evidence for self-selected reading comes from our own experience. What happens when someone gives you a book as a present, as a gift? Oh my, it's always awkward. Here is Garrison Keillor talking about it. Garrison Keillor is a famous North American humorist, and he talks about gifts. He says, as a former English major, people give me gift books. I'm a sitting duck for gift books. In the past few years, I've gotten Dickens, Thackeray, Smollers, Richardson, Emerson, Keats, Boswell, and the Brontes, all of them great. None of them ever read by me. All of them now on my shelf, looking at me and making me feel guilty. Gift books, presents are assigned reading. I hate it when someone gives me a storybook, a fiction book. Now, if it's a professional book, I take it a little more seriously. Because if it's a colleague, yes, usually there's a good reason. I trust my colleagues. But in terms of novels, where I have this Garrison Keillor shelf of all the books people have given me as gifts, and I feel this like Garrison Keillor, I feel them staring down, making me feel guilty. I'm not going to read them. Now, I will accept fiction books from one person without question. When he recommends a book, I read it immediately because he knows me better than I know myself. He's always right, and that's my son. He always knows. He says, Dad, read this, and I do, and he's totally right, okay? But in general, no. We want to select our own books. When I am telling you some stories about me, because I think they're true of you. When I was in secondary school in English in the United States, we had required reading. We read the classics. One year it was American literature. One year it was British literature. I read the books. I took tests on them. I passed the test. Guess what? I don't remember a single book I read in secondary school. Not one. They're gone. It was absolute torture. I'm sure they were wonderful. It was not for me. what I did when I was in secondary school, I went home and I read what I wanted to read. I read science fiction, and believe it or not, I read baseball stories, which were absolutely wonderful. Guess what? I remember all of those books, every single one. I have this friend, Seymour. Seymour and I, before COVID, and we're going to start this again, we met once a week and had coffee, and we reread baseball stories by a guy named John R. Tunis. Absolutely brilliant literature. And we discussed them, etc. They were as good today as they were when I was a teenager, some of them even better. And I remember every scene, everyone. So the self-selected reading is what counts. Our goal, I think, is to bring students to the point where they can select their own fiction. Now, let me review for you why people disagree with this, why people think fiction is not a good idea. We need to assign nonfiction, okay? We're very serious. I have 4 arguments, and I'm going to answer them in the rest of the time. What we want for our students is not everyday language. We want them to have academic language, the language of school, the language of science, the language of history. That's number 1. I agree, we want that, but we'll talk about it. Number 2, fiction doesn't give you knowledge. It gives you a story. Nonfiction gives you knowledge. That's better. It does not make you a mature thinker, as nonfiction does. We call this habits of mind. One critic said, a public library should not provide people with flabby mental nutriment, strong stuff, okay? In fact, one person said, it's not because, it's not that they're reading, they shouldn't be reading so much of that stuff. They shouldn't read it at all. It's bad for them. Also, if we allow them to select their own books, they'll just stay with easy books. Kids are lazy. All these arguments are wrong. Let me answer them. Number 1, academic language. Guess what? It's all there in fiction. Academic language is there. Don't worry about it. Here's a study done by my former student, Jeff McQuillan, published in the journal Reading in a Foreign Language, year 2020. He analyzed the vocabulary in Harry Potter novels, the 7 Harry Potter novels. He found that Harry Potter novels have a great deal of academic language. There's an official list of academic words, okay, that they use for preparation. If you know these words, you're ready for, higher education. About half of them are there in the Harry Potter novels, and they repeat over and over, so you have a good chance of acquiring them. Another study by Jeff McQuillan, he looked at 22 novels for young people, Twilight, Nancy Drew, all those, Sweet Valley High. If you read them in 1 year, you'll get nearly 40% of the academic vocabulary you need for school. They're there, you'll pick them up. My favorite one is a science fiction study. 1 year of reading science fiction, you'll get most of the vocabulary you need for all areas of science. Wow, this makes life so much easier. The studies also show that for vocabulary in general, fiction is better than nonfiction. Whoa. Study done at the University of London. There's a group of people in London who have been looking at the same people over time since they were, 2-3 years old. And the last time they gave them tests and talked to them, the subjects were 42 years old, okay? They met with them once every few years, gave them a little test, an interview. I don't know how old the researchers were, okay? Anyway, last time they gave them a vocabulary test, native speakers of English vocabulary. What did they find? They asked them what they read. Reading fiction resulted in more vocabulary than nonfiction, at least what they call middle-brow fiction. This was independent of how much reading they did when they were younger, independent of their vocabulary when they're younger. It's how much reading they were doing at age 42. So when I get to be 42, I'm going to start reading. How do you like that? It can help you at any age, okay? Okay. So the reading it's very good. So number 1, you get academic language through fiction, you get a lot of it. The second, doesn't give you knowledge. Yes, it does. Fascinating. This is research that's been done in English as a first language. An eager graduate student, this is a terrific research topic. Studies from the University of Michigan, Keith Stanovich and his research team. People who read more fiction know more about a lot of things we do in school. They know more about history. They knew more about literature. They know more about science. They know more about practical things. That's what happened to me in reading the law novels. I got to tell you about my cousin Evelyn, okay? My cousin Evelyn,
Sure.
I've always been very close to Evelyn. When she lived close by, she was my mom's best friend, really nice aunt-niece relationship. And I used to go visit Evelyn and her husband, Marty. Evelyn's now in her 90s. She's 94, and we're still quite close. I still talk to her all the time on the phone, etc. I play the piano. She plays the violin. So we would play together and all that. And Marty was just as nice as Evelyn was. So we really bonded. Anyway, Evelyn said, you know what I'm going to do? My cousin Martin, he died about 2 years ago. He said, my husband Martin knew everything about law because he went to law school. And it was very helpful in our lives to know about the law. That's true, it is. I am going to take a class in law. I said, Evelyn, don't do that. Read John Grisham novels. Sending her John Grisham novels, okay? I'm ordering them. She loves them. We agreed you read 10 John Grisham novels, it's a year of law school.
Okay, with just a little note here. Would reading fiction make the person the second Catch Me If You Can character?
Oh yeah, you are there in the book. You are absorbed in the story.
Yeah,
I'll talk about that. You become, that's why you know so much and meet so many. You meet more people in fiction than you'll ever meet in real life.
Definitely.
Yeah, good point. Very good point. Okay, so it gives you knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
It also gives you, and here we go, habits of mind. Here's the quote. Terry Gross, a radio personality, very good in LA. You're learning to be somebody else, learning to see the world through their eyes. You find out more things. One young man wrote an article about this. He's a high school student when he wrote it, it was published. And he said, I've met more people in fiction than I have in real life, etc. It also gives you a skepticism about ideas. You don't accept simple ideas. You learn the world is complicated. Simple ideas, like, I won't mention names, build a wall between the United States and Mexico, raise tariffs with China. Simple ideas that just absolutely didn't work at all. You need to find out more about the world and study, be skeptical. You learn this from fiction. You learn the world is very, very complicated. I want to read you two quotes. One is from Barack Obama. Barack Obama did not study the same research I did, but he came to the same conclusions. He was interviewed by The Guardian, and they asked him about his reading. He said, when I think about how I understand my role as citizen president, the most important stuff I've learned from novels. Wow. It has to do with empathy. This is what you get. It has to do with being comfortable with the notion the world is complicated and full of grays, but there's still truth to be found. It's possible to connect with someone, even though they're very different from you. And here's Noam Chomsky, similar conclusion. It's quite possible, overwhelmingly probable, that we'll always learn more about human life and personality from novels than from scientific psychology. I realized this when I listened to Murder on the Orient Express.
By Agatha Christie.
Agatha Christie, it's so much is happening. So many people, so many stories. You learn so much about people, how they react, etc. So the arguments against fiction dissolve when we research. Again, I have to point out the research is based on first language. This is an invitation for research out here. I think this is true in general. Okay.
If you allow me, Professor, before you transition to the next point, and while you're drinking your cup of water, this question just came to my mind when you were narrating about the importance of nonfiction in increasing people's awareness of language and other fields of study without delving deep in them. How do we, well, it's a big challenge for me in the EFL and for a lot of my fellow teachers in the EFL context, is to adapt the fiction and nonfiction in our daily activities of teaching due to the intensity or the high level of textuality and the intensity and the higher academic level of word choice. And that leads me to this question. And if you have time, of course, you can address, how do we condition listening to nonfiction in our teaching of EFL context?
I'll give you a quick answer and tell you about the work of Beniko Mason. I've not been specific about application. Let me give you her work as example. Here's what she does for English as a foreign language in Japan, college level students. The beginning stage is stories. That's it. It's stories.
Okay.
She likes to take them from Grimm's fairy tales. Okay. She works on the stories, finds the hard words, and prepares ways of explaining them, draw a picture, use context, tells the story, makes it completely comprehensible. That's stage one. The students may do this for 1, 2, 3 semesters. They will hear hundreds of stories, not just 2 or 3 like we do now. Gradually, as they hear more and more, and she can tell if they're understanding, a good teacher knows this, okay? There's no quiz at the end, okay? And her research shows you get more vocabulary this way than from doing vocabulary exercises. It's much more efficient. Their first reading is one of the stories that they've heard, etc. Then they start reading. The first reading is graded readers, books written for language acquirers. That's what I've been doing. I'll tell you about my life here at home. Once a week, I've been going to the supermarket where it's special time for old people. And the first time I went there about 1.5 years ago, I was ringing up paying for my food, and the guy taking my food, his name was Fidel. I assumed he was from Mexico. I spoke to him in Spanish. He answered in English, which is what you're supposed to do. And I then said to him in Spanish, I said, Fidel, you can help me. My goal is to speak Spanish the way you do. Let's speak Spanish. He loved it. Fidel and I have been friends for the last 1.5 years.
Oh my God.
We've been talking, we gossip. And his speech to me is more complicated than it was before. I'm getting better. I'm not getting better from talking to him because I only talked to him for like 30 seconds. He's got to do his work. I go home and I've been reading graded readers, simplified Spanish books. I've read this many of them. I can read real, authentic Spanish. It's a little bit of a strain for me. I'm reading more and more of these graded readers, hundreds of them. That's the answer to your question. Once they can read authentic books, they don't need us anymore. That's the end of our instruction. Our goal is to bring them to the point where they can read real novels. Then they'll get it all. That's the goal. That's the goal of school in general. School is not to make you a master. School is to bring you to the point where you can start your profession. Same thing here. So they shouldn't be, I think it'd be very hard for them to read authentic novels when they're still EFL students. I would read lots of graded readers. The good news about graded readers, I've been reading them in Spanish. It's also true in English. They're becoming good literature. They used to be really dumb stories. Not anymore. I've got a few favorite, I'll tell you about one of them, okay? Some personal stuff. One of my favorite authors is a guy named Bill Van Patten. You may have heard of him. Bill Van Patten is a first-class researcher in language acquisition. He likes my work. I like his work. We quote each other a lot. Okay, so this is good. Bill Van Patten speaks Spanish fluently. His mom, Spanish speaker, grew up in Texas. He's been writing graded readers in Spanish. They're really interesting. Now, I'll tell you about Bill. Bill is very open. He's a wonderful sense of humor. He does comedy, and he's very open about his life and his sexuality. This is interesting. Bill is gay. Bill is homosexual, and he'll tell anybody about it. Doesn't matter. One time, he and I were doing a plenary keynote presentation together. I think ACTFL, one of the big things. And we were both on the stage answering questions. And suddenly the lights went off and they came on again, super bright. You know, it's like this. Bill looked at me and he says, "This is like waking up in a gay bar at 4 o'clock in the morning and you see who you're with." Looked at me and he says, "I'm with you." Oh no. I was the rest of the hour. This is Bill Van Patten. Anyway, the book he wrote was about a brother and a sister. And it's really autobiographical about Bill, because I know about his life. The brother was gay, and that was Bill's character, and the sister was not. And the brother had a problem. How can I explain this to my mother and father? The sister took over and did it in a gentle, kind, convincing way and solved the big family problem, brought peace and harmony to the family. This is in graded readers. It was deeply, deeply moving. Good stories. Another one I like, oh, that's okay. I want to just tell you stories. I can tell you more about that another time. But there's some good ones out there, some really good ones. Anyway, let's now go to the last question. Will they stick with easy books? No, they won't. Here we have a lot of research in first language. I want to know what's going to happen in second. We don't know. First of all, the research on first language shows when you allow students to select their own reading, the books they select are usually more difficult than the assigned books. Wow, at least as the same. This is what Fei Shin's on, and big study, more difficult. One study that Scholastic Company did, they asked kids to pick their own reading. So only 7% of what they picked was easier than their reading level. 28% was above. Lou LeBrandt, great study, 1958. As children mature, they select more complicated books. They don't want to be bored. They're not looking at reading level. They're looking for interesting stories, okay? And they take a wider variety of genres, a little of this, a little of that, etc. We did a study. This is in a book I did with Cian Lee and Lau. We looked at part of this. Christy Lau, we looked at students in Hefei, China. We were there to do this. And we looked at what they selected from their school library over 3 years in Chinese, okay? The books taken out of the library from grade 3 to grade 6, they read more, and they read more sophisticated books. They read more complicated books. No question this is true in first language. You let students self-select. The books they select will not be easier. I want to know if it's true of second language. There's a good research project. I'm going to bet that it is once they reach the stage of being able to read authentic books. I do a lot of reading in other languages. I certainly don't look for easy things. I read a lot in French. I read a lot in German. Science fiction because I like it. I never look at reading level, etc., because I'm already to the point where I can read authentic reading. We don't have to worry about this, okay? I also read narrowly. French science fiction, I read one author because I love his stuff, and his books are big and thick, etc. Okay, I want to come to the epilogue. If this is going to work, Students need access. The big deal now, in my mind, libraries, libraries, libraries with trained, competent librarians who will help our students select books. They'll find out what the student likes, what they're interested in, and give them a choice. This is what Beniko Mason did. As they moved on, she would show them books at the next level. Take what you like, okay? And you don't have to finish it. You can try another one. You need lots of books. She had access to a library of graded readers that contained 5,000 English graded readers.
Wow.
Isn't that delicious? Isn't that wonderful?
Definitely.
Wow. Yes. And the leader of research in this in first language, Keith Curry Lance. Keith Curry Lance has done studies on this. Schools where the library has a qualified librarian and a really good collection of books, reading scores are higher. There it is. For children of poverty, the library is their only chance. That's where they're going to get books. Not from home, not from bookstores. I had no problem, okay? I grew up middle class, comfortable, lots of books in the home. My life changed when I was 9 years old. My sister got me my first library card. Even though I had access to books at home, that made a huge difference. So libraries, libraries, libraries. This is the secret of success. Okay, that is my message today, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Professor, for this lovely and insightful introduction to language acquisition and the patterns of language acquisition, especially for second and first language learner of English or other languages. I've got some of my questions written here, but we either
answers. Go
say
ahead.
it again.
You have questions, I have answers.
Yes, definitely. But some of these questions we either accidentally or indirectly addressed, you kindly addressed during your presentation. One of them was how do we condition listening, especially with the density of the text, especially some writers are accused of, boasting their skills of writing by choosing very high academic level of expressions. I remember John Hitchcock used to use the expression, the word ignominious. I think the word is ignominious, to describe this pattern of writing that is not geared to English learners or second language learners or readers, but to native speakers who have very high capacity in language learning. The second question that I have on my list here: how do we adapt the audiobooks that you mentioned, part of your story, to teach in EFL context? Especially here in Baghdad and Iraq, we have big community of learners of English, especially this generation that is exposed to a ton of online audiobooks and YouTube channels that present different kind of lessons in English.
Good. Let me do both of them. Complexity is a big one for me. It underlies a related question. Why don't more people know about theories of language acquisition? How come they don't know about comprehensible input and all this stuff? There are three reasons. One of them is the writing style, just as you mentioned, exactly. What we call the tortured prose of academic language. It's horrible. People who write this stuff are just, in my opinion, just showing off. They're not trying to communicate. So this is a real problem. My solution is to write simple articles, keep it comprehensible. I hope more people will do that. Sometimes they do it in order to be safe. It's so complicated, no one will understand it, and then they can then say anything they want and feel good about themselves.
Okay.
So that is a big one. The other one is the articles are generally too long. No, I don't have time to read all the stuff that comes out, and that's all I do all day. I'm retired. And I can't get through you read a journal comes and the first article is 60 pages and the guy doesn't present the idea until 30 pages. No. And the articles are expensive. Nobody can afford them. Unless you are a member of a university library, first class, that gives you privileges, you can't get at these. Nobody can read them. So I have one way around this. Number one, articles number one should be short. 3 pages, 4 pages. That's what my articles are these days. If you don't understand the 3-4 pages, you're reading the wrong article. Back up, read something else. Okay, until you're. An article was published in the journal Nature a couple of years ago about the double helix. The diagram for DNA.
Yes. Yeah.
Watson. I downloaded it. It's so clear. If you remember half of high school biology, you can understand it. That was a brilliant model. There wasn't a long introduction. The conclusion was one sentence. Not you do this with your life, you could do that, but keep it short, stick to the point. So that's number one. Use clear language and make it inexpensive. All of my papers are now open access. They're all free. I am not writing any more books because nobody can buy them. They're too expensive. I can't afford the new books in language acquisition, the collections. They are always at least $100 American, usually $200, $300. I don't have that kind of money. I don't know anybody who does. Only libraries, and you have to be at the university if you want to use their library, okay? So this is ridiculous. From now on, short, comprehensible, free. I think if something is for the public good, for the common good, it must be free, and that means scientific. Let me tell you how to find stuff. First of all, if you can, follow me on Twitter, Krashen. I announce new articles and I announce what my colleagues are doing every so often. You can go to my website, sdkrashen.com. D is for David, my middle name, and I have lots of my articles posted. My colleagues are now doing the same thing.
Amazing.
Go to Backseat Linguist. You'll get Jeff McQuillan's articles. Okay? And they're short, to the point, and just wonderful. My colleague Beniko Mason has benikomason.net. Her studies are there. Nushan Ashtari does it with her stuff in bilingualism, heritage language, etc. Most of us are doing this now. We hope this will change. This all began with a British mathematician who decided he was going to boycott the journals. He says, we do the work, we do the editing, we get no money. You get all the money, and it's so expensive.
Yeah.
You see one of my papers, and you decide, it's in a journal, and you decide you want to order it. You can order it through the journal. It's usually $40 American. The author doesn't get the money, the publisher gets it. And I'll be really personal about this. Bill Van Patten, my buddy, and his colleagues have written a series of papers about me. They're quite nice. I like them. All the criticism back, and I wrote not a rebuttal, but a response. They were published in the journal Language Learning. I could have made them open access if I wanted to pay them $1,000, which I don't have. Okay. You can order it from the journal, and it's $40, $50, etc. I have posted it on Twitter, my website, etc. So you can find it there. Okay. This is the way. There are also several illegal downloading services. Find them. I think they're a good thing.
Yeah.
To force change in our society. Okay. So I'll close with one more story. I'm very often asked to review papers, which I like to do. People reviewed my papers for journals, so I do theirs. I then made an announcement about 5 years ago. I will only renew papers that are 5 pages or shorter. I haven't reviewed a single paper in 5 years.
Wow.
It's up to the senior scholars to do this first, then become more acceptable, short papers. short papers. It's killing the profession. We're now to the point where we have no research profession anymore. We've killed it with expensive papers, long papers, etc.
Of course. Okay. Professor, thank you so much for this lovely and insightful introduction to language acquisition and your tips and recommendations regarding language acquisition and the best way. I, to be honest, started recently doing some audiobooks of the common Iraqi short stories that are written in Arabic, and I'm translating them into English, and I'm just posting them on my page on Facebook. I'll definitely share one of them from the Iraqi folklore that I interestingly translated by myself from Arabic to English. I'm not perfect at translating that, but I try my best to just render it as approachable of a kind of a content by English learners. This is a great opportunity to talk to you, Professor Stephen. Thank you so much.
Excuse me, sorry. Audiobooks, you asked me about those.
Yes, definitely.
I think they're wonderful. They're comprehensible input, more of them. You don't have to listen and read at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Just relax and enjoy the book. Everything will get better.
Definitely. Definitely. Thank you, Professor, for your lovely presence here and lovely and insightful comments and insightful recommendations for EFL and ESL learners of English. It's such a great opportunity to talk to you. Please stay in touch. I'll definitely send you an email later on to brief you about a few things that we need to work on. And also I'll send you an edited version of this video, hopefully once it gets done with the subtitle and the translation into Arabic that comes later. Great to talk to you, Professor. Thank you for your lovely time. I hope you enjoy the rest of your lovely day in California, and looking forward to talk to you very soon.
Okay, thank you very much. You've been a very good host. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Professor. Stay in touch and have a lovely day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.